Understanding the basic psychology of the dog you have in your house is quite important. Everyone has their own different styles. I guess everyone will have something that feels more comfortable. However, I personally find picking one side, so whatever side works best for you, I personally use the right side, and getting used to holding the leash like this, so one hand through the loop, and then the other hand overhand grip, okay? And I find this is the strongest position, along with it gives me the capability to adapt to the dog, okay? So if I'm overhand grip like this, and say the dog, I need to give the dog more leash, I can easily transition into a position where my hands are close together, and I'm giving the dog a bit more leash to give the dog more of a chance to respond. Whereas if I'm in a tight position, I'm out in the real world and something gets a bit hairy and I need to shorten the leash, come on, I can easily slide down and and shorten the leash if I need to. So it gives me the ability to adapt to the dog and the situation by changing the length of the leash and changing the amount of control that I have on the leash by changing that length. So I'm going to let Pippi off leash for a second. So there's a couple of different ways we can use the leash. The first is using guidance, okay? So guidance is where we just guide the dog with the leash, okay? So it's very gentle leash guidance. So we're not forcing, it's nothing like this, it's nothing trying to force the dog to do anything, it's just guiding, okay? Especially if you have a very sensitive or nervous dog, leash guidance is very, very useful. Number two would be what I call a nudge, okay? So if you were guiding and it wasn't working, you could give a little bit of a nudge the dog along, just to try refocus the dog a little bit, okay? So you'll see me at times, especially when dealing with a reactive dog or a dog that is in a very aroused state, I might use nudging on the leash a little bit to help keep the dog's focus off the stimulus that the dog is trying to hyperfixate on or fixate on in the environment, okay? And then number three is more of a pop. So a pop is more of a short, sharp pop. I would only really use a pop if the dog is like really reactive, and a lot of the time I'm trying to avoid pushing the dog over threshold. So a pop isn't something we would use a lot of. It sometimes can be useful for certain dogs in certain situations, and it would only be used a little bit in order to get the dog to start to respond, paired with a lot of positive reinforcement. So the more positive reinforcement we use, the less force I have to use on the leash, okay? So if I set things up properly at the earliest stages by building engagement, building the right relationship, I can be a lot less forceful with the leash, along with me monitoring the environment, how the dog's responding to the environment, and whether the dog is overwhelmed. By looking at all these three factors, so my relationship, how engaged the dog is, how I'm using the leash, and then the environment I'm in, I can make it a lot less aversive for the dog when dealing with the dog in real life situations, and I can get a lot quicker and better results that last a lot longer, okay? The more force you have to use and the more you overload the dog, the shorter, you might look like the dog's getting good results straight away, but they generally are short-lasted, and the dog can become a lot more unpredictable, okay? So if you use a lot of force to stop the dog doing something, say you're jerking hard on the leash to stop a reaction, it's likely that it is going to be short-lived, okay? If you pair it with a lot of reinforcement, a lot of positive reinforcement, you can make it work 100%. But the more force you use and the more aversive it is, what happens is the dog is doing it to avoid something. And the dog's warning signs completely change. So you might have a dog that becomes preemptive of the leash. He starts preempting the end of the pop coming on, and he becomes he might become very focused on you, but doing it just because he's nervous or nervous of what could occur. And like I said, with that, it has its own problems, okay? So we're always trying to be on the side of trust, reinforcement, using the least aversive methods possible, and you get a more of a true picture of where the dog is actually at, and you don't overwhelm the dog as much, meaning you don't lose as much trust, you end up with a better result at the end. It may take a little bit longer initially, but it doesn't really, because like if you use more force, yes, it may look like it's working quicker, but the behavior is only going to stop when the aversive is present. The second you give the leash to somebody else, or the aversive control is gone, the dog is just going to go back to reacting again, okay? If you haven't solved the underlying cause of the problem, whether it's a lack of impulse control, the dog's fearful or nervous, the dog doesn't have enough structure. If you don't fix these problems or these overarching issues or the core of the issue, you end up with just suppressing things and never knowing why the dog's doing it, and it's likely that the dog becomes more unpredictable and loses trust in you over a long period of time, which actually hinders your relationship and hinders your training if you were to look at it on a scale, okay?